So for today's project, we are going to be working with simplifying the head into planes or facets. And one really good way of experiencing that and making a start on that is to draw with straight lines. So Inez is going to model for me, and I'm going to have a go at drawing a head using a ruler. And actually I'm using a biro. You should decide for yourselves. You could work with pencil, but if you find you keep rubbing things out, then just have a go with the biro, because it will just force you to accept what you've done and move on, because you won't be able to rub it out. So I've got a ruler, but I've also got some shorter bits of straight edge, and I would probably start with framing Inez's head with her hair, and you will see, you will experience probably quite a frustrating experience of being restricted to straight lines, and you'll want to cheat and just ignore the ruler for a minute and do the line without the ruler. But try not to, because in a way the challenge is actually, the discipline will help you see. It's all about seeing the planes of the head. So the head is a complex three-dimensional form, and if you are forced to simplify it into straight lines, then you'll start to understand how you can simplify that complexity. So I'm just going to swap from my long ruler. I've got some other bits. I've got some short bits of card, and I've got my loyalty card from the works. So you might find that that's a bit easier. So I'm starting now with the ruler, with the straight line rather, and the biro. You would do well, I think, to look at some of the images I sent you. There are those sculptured heads, and then there are the drawings by Giacometti and by paintings by Ewan Uglow. And they're all very much constructed with straight lines and a kind of geometric vision of the head. So that's going to be helpful to help you see. I'm showing you this method first with the ruler, which I know won't work for everyone. So I'll also show you another way of doing it where you only need one hand, because obviously you need two hands to hold a ruler. So I'm just picking up some of these straight lines, and with reference to that sculpted head that was on the email, you'll probably begin to see. But also once you start to construct something like this, then actually you'll see geometry yourselves. I might do two lines for the eyebrow. And as with a lot of these exercises where you're restricted, drawing with a stick and ink, for example, when you're restricted to certain marks, you have to look and consider what you do, and that will be the value. Now, I suspect what you'll also find is that, initially it's a bit frustrating. Things aren't quite in the right place. That eye's in the wrong place. And in a way, it's not really until you start to join some of these lines up that you create planes. So I'm recommending that initially you try and just work with lines. But if it becomes frustrating or not so easy to read, then you might find it helpful, as you'll have seen in the Giacometti drawing especially, to actually fill in some of these planes. So I've seated Inez with the window behind us so that there's some light coming straight onto her face, and that means that some of the planes at the side of her head, on the side of the cheek there, on the side of the nose, they're actually in shadow. So if you can light if you've got a model, or if you're going to work with photographs, I'll send you some photographs as well, try and light them in such a way maybe that there's light at the front, and therefore some of these planes, and this is what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to do a little bit of hatching. There's a plane there on the side of the nose, a plane on the side of the cheek. I'm trying to not be too tonal, just because I think it's good if, as an exercise, to consolidate the experience of these lines creating planes and then helping you see planes. And if you do too much tonal filling in, then maybe you won't see those planes quite so clearly anymore. So that's just a suggestion you want to work with. If it's getting frustrating that your head isn't coming together just with lines, then try a little bit of filling in. And so I'll do something with Inez's hair as well, and so on. It's a slow process, but it's a process of looking and a process of seeing the head in a simplified way. And maybe if you keep referring to those diagrams and those drawings, you'll begin to see, well, you'll see better. You'll see planar or facets in the head. So that's working with the biro and the ruler. So I'll just pause and then I'll set up with a slightly different approach. So another approach worth trying, still with the drawing stage, I have some dilute ink in a vessel, and I have a piece of card. So this is worth trying as well, but especially if you can't use both hands, one to hold the ruler and one to hold the pencil or the pen, then this is very good, because you can just dip your bit of card into the ink and put on straight lines like that. You'll get a feel for the length of the lines, and you might get a few drips as well. But this is probably a bit quicker. Although speed isn't everything, I have to say, because as I've tried to describe, some of the frustrations of this process will actually help you see a little bit better. So I've diluted this ink because I thought that would be easier to make it flow, but it does make my bit of card floppy. So just be ready for that. Have a few bits of card. Often, and we'll go on to this a bit more through the course of this presentation, if you want to, this is all about simplifying the head, of course, but if you want to work with the head, a simplified head, but one that isn't very detailed, not sure what I was going to say. It was something to do with... Oh, yes, yeah. So simplifying the head. We'll look maybe a bit later at some angled heads. And one of the key sort of landmarks, I think, especially for an angled head or just for simplifying head, is the brow, is the plane of the forehead. So you'll see in some of the examples that, well, Peggy Kroll-Roberts and other artists will put a line across the brow, and then that isolates the forehead and actually helps you get some orientation to the head. But I've jumped ahead a little bit here, so I need a line down the side of the nose there, and something a bit smaller for there, and let's see, a line across the mouth. You can see my lines aren't very straight. I'm taking liberties with a bit of card. But you wouldn't do that, I know. You'll be very strict. So this is another way of doing it, that you can, just by using the card, and you'll probably, as a result, you might get longer lines than you were hoping for. But if you angle it slightly, you can make a shorter line. So that's definitely worth trying, not only if you're struggling to use both hands, but actually just because it's quite good fun. It's quite quick, and you could maybe then perhaps with some charcoal or something, possibly with some wash, but probably better with charcoal so that you can fill in a few planes, but retain the linear element to your observations. Maybe if I put a line in there, because I'm finding with the card that I'm probably putting down more lines than I actually want. I suppose the other thing you could do actually with this, but this may be a bad idea, I think this is a bad idea, would be just to block in, you know, some of those. But I think that's a bad idea because if you were to use charcoal or a pen to hatch in some planes, then you can even do directional marks. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to encourage you to see things possibly in a slightly diagrammatic way, just so that you can clarify this process, the process of taking a complex three-dimensional form and simplifying it into geometric planar shapes. Okay, so I'll pause there, and then I'm going to look at painting some of these drawings, and then possibly a little bit with angled heads as well. So I did a little bit more to these initial head studies. This is the ink one, and you can see I've used the card to sort of hatch in some planes to fill in a little bit, which I think is helpful. And this is the first one that I did. I mean, I actually developed it a bit more using a photograph of Inez. You might find for this exercise your model won't want to sit for hours while you fumble with a ruler, and working from the photograph might be better. I made her forehead a bit smaller, and now that I look at it, it seems a bit too small. But I should emphasize, and that's why maybe it's better to take a photograph of your model and work with the photograph. This is meant to, this is an exercise, so it's not going to produce, probably, it's not going to produce a fabulous portrait of your model. It's meant much more to help you understand something about the head. So what I'm going to do next, and I recommend you try this, is work from the drawing to do a bit of painting. So this is an old painting, I've covered it with something just to try and obliterate what was there before. And I think it's worth starting with lines, the sorts of lines that you drew with your ruler, and then maybe blocking in with planes of colour. So I'm going to work with what's here, my straight lines. I mean, it doesn't matter if I don't do them absolutely straight now, because you know, I've understood something which I'm now trying to translate into paint and also into colour, because that's going to be part of my next stage. So working from the drawing, just plotting things out, and probably a thin brush to lay down some of those lines. You could do it with card, of course, you know, you understand why you would do that, but I think it's quite a good combination to do a few lines with the brush and then block in with different tones and temperatures of colour, which I'll come on to next. So let me pause that while I do this and show you what's coming next. So I put in most of the main lines that I'd found when I was drawing with the ruler and the biro, and now I'm going to start just by blocking in some hair. So I just use some burnt umber to... my card is taking the paint off. I just use some burnt umber to draw out those lines, and now I'm just filling in the hair because that's quite useful. You know, the hair, this dark hair is a good frame to the face, but because I'm painting on wet paint and there's an old painting under there, it's not going on very well. Never mind. So that's what I would do first if I were you. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to mix up some skin colours, and they are the colours that are on a handout that I'll attach to the email, and I'll start with a shadow pattern. So let's finish that without you watching me. So I think it's helpful to fill in the hair. I've also reinforced the eyebrows a little bit, just with the same brown. I've now mixed up some shadow colour. So this is on a handout, but it's a mixture of cerulean and orange and some white. And I'm just starting with one shadow colour. And the main planes, and I should talk more about this now really, the planes of the head are very much a reflection of the skull, the structure of the skull. And the main planes on the side of the head are below the cheekbone here, because that the cheekbone is this zygomatic bone which goes from the eye socket back towards the ear. So with that cheekbone standing out, there's a hollow below it, and above it there's a hollow as well on the temple. So these planes here that we found with straight lines under the cheekbone and above the cheekbone on the temple are some simplified sides to that face. So they're worth filling in. And I was keen to get Inez lit from the front, so that when we looked at her nose, or when I was drawing her nose, there was light on the front plane, but there were also some shadow shapes on the side. So that would be another thing to block in. And of course underneath, and that's a bit more complex, and I might make that a bit darker, but let's just get into the idea of the nose having a front, a side and an underneath. Now my bit of card is a little too big for some things, but on the other hand it's quite good if you are forced to simplify. And as those of you who've been doing this in other situations, when you simplify, and if you block in, especially blocking in paint the way I am with bits of card, then colours bump into each other. And whilst you're doing something that's the ear in there, by the way, whilst you're doing something that's very, overly simplified initially, when these colours knock into each other, they start to mix a bit, and you'll get some of the transitions. So this is a painting stage. I know that not everybody will want to paint, and that's fine. I'd certainly recommend you, if you're not going to paint, then do a few drawings, or follow the drawing process to the point where you feel you've grasped it, or you've understood it. I mentioned angled heads, but I think angled heads actually is a different lesson, so I'll save that. So I've put in the shadow colours, and I've now also mixed a much lighter colour. Again, this is on the sheet, but this is some orange and some cadmium yellow. and some white. So where are my lighter shapes? They're definitely on the front of the nose. Get some of that on the front there. And I think it was that particular shape on the forehead. And then the cheekbone that I've mentioned already. That's going to be a lighter area. A bit more on the nose. And I'm trying to reflect some of those planes, which I've already identified, some on the chin, and coming down the front of the face as well. So that can be quite helpful just to get some of the lighter areas established. And then I have a third colour, which is a bit more of a mid-tone, a bit more warmth, and that's going to be part of the transition. So maybe here, for example, see how these work. That's maybe darker than I thought it was. So you're going to hopefully have a similar experience where you can say, right, I need to adjust some of these colours. I've started with 3 because I think that again is consistent with trying to work in a simplified way, but it would be good to adjust some of these colours as I see how they behave when they're together. And I feel there's a big jump from that warmer mid-tone to the lighter one. So I should probably do a little bit of mixing and see if I can find something in between that helps make a transition. But again, if you find you're using lots of colours or lots of tones, then you may be undermining this exercise. See, that's a bit better, that's a bit of a softer transition, and that might work well in there. And really I'm working with the planes of the face. I'm working with pale skin. But there's going to come a point quite soon where those features disappear, and I should really give them a bit of attention. And the first thing to do probably is perhaps do something smaller and go back to just getting a bit more contrast into the eye, for example, a bit of an accent of the eyelash and the pupil. So there's a bit of pupil. And maybe a bit of a restate the line of the eyelash. Like that. And similarly I would make a darker colour for the top lip. So I hope that is enough guidance for working with the head, trying to, having looked at the images that I sent you, trying to look at the head in terms of simplified planes, planes on the temple, on the side of the cheek, below the cheekbone, the side of the nose and underneath the nose as well. That's one more thing I could just quickly do. It would be good to have a slightly darker plane under the nose. So I've added a little bit of my umber, my brown, to my shadow colour. So I'm now getting more complicated, but I think that's okay because I've worked my way towards that. I've tried to keep things simple and then get to a point where I need to look for more complexity. So I'm slightly strengthening that plane under the nose just to help that stand out a bit more. I don't know how well you see that. But having seen a dark plane there, I might also see one under the chin. And strengthen that. I'm working with just spadefuls of paint. You don't have to do that. So yeah, going through a process then of simplifying the head into planes through a straight line drawing, either with a pen and a ruler, or maybe dipping a piece of card into the ink and getting that sort of imprinted straight line. So the ink's quick, the ruler's slow, but at least do one or two of them, either from the photographs I've sent you or from your own models, your own sources. If you do take your own photographs, have your own model, or source some photographs, make sure that they're well lit, and often to have the light from the front is a really good place to start, because then you've got front planes and side planes. When the light can be helpful in understanding this, and if the light isn't helpful, then that's self-evident. So then you might try some painting from your drawings and see where you get with that. So this is really a lesson in consolidating the simplification of the head. And there's probably a future lesson, I think, which could be all about I'm just trying to get another colour. I want to put some colour on the eyelids. All about angled heads and simplifying the head when it's angled. I get a little bit on the eyelid there. Be good as well, just to bring them out. And maybe on the lower lip. Okay, so hopefully when we convene on Sunday evening, you might have made a start on some of these straight line drawings, and we can have a little discussion about what works, what's helpful, and whether it makes sense to you. Let's hope it does. Okay, so see you tomorrow.